The rain was coming down in relentless, icy sheets when a young waitress bolted through the heavy mahogany doors of Le Sereno, risking her life for a man she was supposed to fear. "Don't get in the car!" she screamed over the thunder, her apron soaked, her hands trembling as she pointed at the sleek black Maybach. He was the most feared syndicate boss on the eastern seaboard. She was just a girl trying to pay off her mother's crushing medical debts. What he did next didn't just shock the criminal underworld. It rewrote the rules of survival, loyalty, and forbidden love. This is the story of a split-second decision that sparked a bloody war and an impossible romance. Keep watching, because the twist at the end changes everything. The air inside Le Sereno was thick with the scent of white truffles, roasted garlic, and the unspoken tension that always accompanied table corner number 4, located in the deeply shadowed, exclusive alcove of the Tribeca establishment. It was a table that was never officially reserved, yet always kept empty on Thursday nights. Harper Davis knew the drill. She was 24, exhausted, and running entirely on cheap coffee and the desperate need for her next paycheck. Her mother's chemotherapy bills were stacking up on their cramped apartment counter like a morbid countdown. Harper couldn't afford mistakes, and she certainly couldn't afford to offend the man sitting at table 4. His name was Gabriel Rossi. To the society pages of New York, Gabriel was a venture capitalist with a taste for sharp tailoring and philanthropic galas. To the streets and to the terrified whispers in the kitchen of Le Sereno, he was the undisputed head of the Rossi syndicate. He was a man carved from cold marble, with piercing dark eyes that seemed to strip away a person's secrets in a single glance. Tonight, he wore a charcoal Tom Ford suit that clung perfectly to his broad shoulders, quietly nursing a glass of 20-year-old Macallan while his 2 massive bodyguards flanked the perimeter of the room. Harper approached his table with practiced invisibility, clearing his empty plates. She kept her eyes downcast, a protective measure she had learned over the past 6 months. The branzino was acceptable. Gabriel's voice was a low, resonant baritone that sent an involuntary shiver down Harper's spine. He didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on the rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows. "I'll let the chef know, sir," Harper murmured, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. She quickly retreated, eager to escape the suffocating aura of power that radiated from him. 10 minutes later, Harper's shift was technically over. The restaurant was emptying out, the storm outside discouraging late diners. Her manager, a nervous, balding man named Henry, handed her a trash bag. "Take this to the alley, Harper, then you're cut." Harper sighed, pushing open the heavy steel door that led to the back service alley. The cold November wind immediately bit through her thin cotton uniform. The alley was poorly lit, the single flickering halogen bulb casting long, jagged shadows against the wet brick walls. As she heaved the bag into the dumpster, a metallic clink echoed over the sound of the rain. Harper froze. She pressed herself against the cold metal of the dumpster, her breath catching in her throat. 50 feet away, near the mouth of the alley where the valet usually parked the VIP cars, stood Gabriel Rossi's armored Mercedes Maybach. A figure in a dark rain slicker was crouched beneath the driver's side door. Harper squinted through the downpour. The man wasn't a valet. He was moving with frantic precision, his hands busy near the undercarriage of the vehicle. A sudden flash of lightning illuminated the alley for a fraction of a second, and in that stark white light, Harper saw 2 things that made her blood run cold. First, a small, blinking red LED light attached to a block of something that looked like grey clay. Second, as the man stood up to flee, the sleeve of his slicker rode up, revealing a vivid, grotesque tattoo of a coiled serpent on his left wrist. The man vanished into the shadows of the storm. Harper stood paralyzed. Her mind raced. Explosive. It was a bomb. Her immediate instinct was to turn around, walk back into the kitchen, grab her coat, and take the subway home to Brooklyn. It wasn't her business. In fact, getting involved in the business of the Rossi family was a guaranteed death sentence. If she spoke up, she would be dragged into a world of violence she couldn't comprehend. If she stayed silent, a notorious criminal would die, and perhaps the city would be safer. But as she placed her hand on the doorknob to go back inside, a sudden image flashed in her mind. It wasn't Gabriel Rossi she thought of. It was his driver, an older, gentle-eyed man named Thomas, who always tipped her $5 and asked about her mother's health. Thomas would be in that car. Thomas would die. "Damn it," Harper whispered, the word lost to the wind. She shoved the heavy steel door open, sprinting through the kitchen, ignoring Henry's shouts of confusion. She burst through the dining room, just as Gabriel Rossi and his entourage were walking out the front doors. Harper hit the street. The rain instantly soaked her to the bone. Ahead of her, Thomas had the rear door of the Maybach open, holding an umbrella. Gabriel was stepping off the curb, pulling up the collar of his coat, his foot inches from the interior of the vehicle. "Stop!" Harper screamed, her voice tearing from her throat. Gabriel paused, his dark eyes snapping toward her. His bodyguards instantly reached inside their jackets, pivoting toward the sound of the threat. Harper didn't care about the guns. She sprinted across the wet pavement, waving her arms wildly. "Don't get in the car," she warned, skidding to a halt just a few feet away from the barrel of a Glock pointed directly at her chest by Gabriel's lead bodyguard. Gabriel raised a single gloved hand. The bodyguard lowered his weapon, though his eyes remained locked on Harper. "Explain," Gabriel demanded, his voice slicing through the noise of the storm. There was no fear in his tone, only cold, hard authority. Under the driver's side," Harper panted, her chest heaving, her wet hair plastered to her face. A man in a slicker. He put something underneath it. A blinking light. For a split second, time seemed to stand still. Gabriel looked at the terrified waitress, assessing her pulse, her dilated pupils, the sheer, undeniable honesty in her panic. He didn't ask questions. He didn't doubt her. Gabriel lunged forward, grabbing Thomas by the lapels of his suit and violently hurling the older man backward onto the sidewalk. Simultaneously, he grabbed Harper's arm, his grip like a vice, and threw his own body weight against hers, tackling her to the concrete behind the thick stone pillar of the restaurant's facade. "Cover!" Gabriel roared. A heartbeat later, the world tore apart. The explosion was deafening, a catastrophic boom that ruptured the night. A shockwave of pure, blistering heat rolled over them, shattering the front windows of Le Sereno and sending a shower of glass cascading onto the street. The heavy armored Maybach was lifted entirely off the ground, a ball of orange fire consuming the metal before slamming back down in a twisted, burning heap. Harper lay pinned beneath the crushing weight of Gabriel Rossi. Her ears were ringing with a high-pitched whine that drowned out the sound of the crackling fire and the car alarms blaring down the block. She couldn't breathe. The air had been sucked from her lungs, replaced by the acrid, choking stench of burning rubber and C4 explosive. Slowly the ringing faded, replaced by the chaotic symphony of panic. People were screaming. Sirens wailed in the distance. Gabriel shifted his weight, pushing himself up on one arm. He looked down at her. His face was covered in a thin layer of soot, a small cut bleeding above his left eyebrow, but his eyes were perfectly clear, calculating. "Lethal." "Are you hit?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. Harper shook her head dumbly, too stunned to speak. She looked past his shoulder at the flaming wreckage of the car. If she had been 5 seconds slower, if he hadn't believed her. Gabriel stood, pulling her up with him effortlessly. His men were already moving. Thomas was on the ground, bleeding from a cut on his head, but alive, being hauled up by the lead bodyguard. A sleek, unassuming black SUV came screeching to a halt on the opposite side of the street. The backup vehicle. "Boss, we need to move, right now," said Matteo, Gabriel's fiercely loyal underboss, who had emerged from the SUV. Matteo held a compact submachine gun, his eyes scanning the rooftops and alleyways. "The cops will be here in 2 minutes, and whoever pressed that detonator might still have eyes on us." Gabriel nodded. He turned to Harper. She was shivering violently, wrapping her arms around her soaked torso, staring at the fire with wide, traumatized eyes. "Go back inside," Gabriel told her, a rare flicker of something resembling gratitude crossing his harsh features. "When the police arrive, tell them you saw nothing. Tell them you were inside when it happened." Harper nodded numbly, taking a step backward. She just wanted to go home. She wanted to wake up from this nightmare. But as she stepped back into the light of the burning car, Matteo cursed sharply. "Gabriel, look." Gabriel followed Matteo's gaze. Across the street, perched on the fire escape of an adjacent building, a silhouette was moving rapidly upward. The flash of the flames illuminated the figure just enough to reveal a sniper rifle slung across his back. The bomber hadn't just planted an explosive, he had stayed to ensure the job was done. And he was looking right at them, right at Harper. Gabriel's jaw locked. The calculus in his mind shifted in a microsecond. The girl had saved his life. By doing so, she had exposed her face to the men trying to kill him. If he left her here, the police would interrogate her, and the cartel that ordered the hit would find her and silence her before she could testify. She was a loose end. "Change of plans," Gabriel said coldly. Before Harper could react, Gabriel stepped forward, grabbed her by the waist, and effortlessly hoisted her off the ground. "Wait, what are you doing?" Harper shrieked, thrashing against his grip. "Let me go!" "If I let you go, you're dead before sunrise," Gabriel stated flatly, hauling her towards the waiting SUV. "You can't just kidnap me. I have to go home. My mother—" "Your mother will have to wait," Gabriel interrupted, shoving her into the back seat of the SUV and sliding in right behind her. Matteo slammed the door shut and jumped into the driver's seat. The tires shrieked against the wet pavement as the heavy vehicle tore away from the curb, leaving the flaming wreckage of the Maybach behind. Inside the SUV, the silence was suffocating, broken only by the sound of the rain pelting the roof and Harper's panicked, ragged breathing. She pressed herself against the far door, staring at Gabriel with raw terror. The man who had just shielded her from a bomb was now her captor. "Where are you taking me?" she demanded, trying to keep the tears from spilling over. "Please, I saved your life. You owe me." "I'm paying you back by keeping you breathing," Gabriel replied, reaching into a hidden compartment and pulling out a first aid kit. He tossed a clean, dry towel into her lap. "Dry your hair. You're shaking." "I don't want a towel. I want to go home," she yelled, her fear morphing into desperate anger. Matteo, navigating the slick city streets at dangerous speeds, glanced in the rearview mirror. "Boss, the Falcone family. It has to be them. The sit-down last week went south, but I didn't think they had the stones to plant a bomb in our territory." Gabriel ignored his underboss, his piercing gaze locked on Harper. "What did you see in the alley? Give me every detail." "I'm not telling you anything until you turn this car around," Harper defied him, her chin jutting out. Gabriel leaned closer. The faint scent of expensive cologne and smoke washed over her. The proximity was terrifying, yet intensely magnetic. "Listen to me very carefully, Miss Davis," he said softly, using her surname. He already knew her name. He knew everything about his regulars. Whoever rigged that car bypassed 3 levels of security. That means someone inside my organization gave them my schedule. There is a traitor in my family, and a rival syndicate trying to take my head. You stepped into the middle of a war. If you go back to your apartment in Brooklyn, they will be waiting for you. They will torture you to find out what you told me, and then they will kill you. Do you understand?" Harper's breath hitched. The reality of his words crashed over her like a physical blow. The cold, logical cruelty of the underworld was suddenly very real. "Now," Gabriel whispered, his eyes never leaving hers. "What did you see?" Harper swallowed hard, her defiance crumbling. "A man," she whispered, in a dark raincoat. He was quick, but when the lightning flashed, I saw his wrist. He had a tattoo. Gabriel's eyes narrowed fractionally. "Describe it." "It was a snake, a coiled serpent, in dark green and black ink. It took up his whole left wrist. Matteo slammed on the brakes, the SUV skidding slightly before catching traction on the FDR drive. He swore loudly in Italian. Gabrielle's expression didn't change, but Harper saw the subtle tightening of his jaw, the deadly stillness that fell over his frame. He looked out the window into the dark, churning waters of the East River. "Drive, Matteo," Gabrielle said quietly. The quietness of his voice was far more terrifying than if he had shouted. "Take us to the estate." The Rossi estate was located deep in the heavily wooded mountains of the Catskills, completely invisible from the main highway. The gates were wrought iron and flanked by heavily armed guards who waved the black SUV through with grim expressions. Harper stared out the tinted window as they drove up a long, winding driveway lined with ancient oaks. The house itself was a sprawling, modern fortress of stone and glass, built into the side of a cliff overlooking a dark, rushing river. It was beautiful, luxurious, and undeniably a prison. When the car stopped, Gabriel stepped out and opened Harper's door. The rain had turned into a light, icy mist here in the mountains. "Welcome to your new home, at least for the foreseeable future," Gabriel said, offering a hand. Harper ignored his hand, stepping out on her own, her legs trembling slightly. "I have a job. I have bills. My mother is sick. I cannot vanish off the face of the earth, Mr. Rossi." "Your job has already been informed you had a family emergency," Gabriel stated calmly, walking her towards the grand entrance. "Your mother's medical bills at Mount Sinai have been paid in full for the next 6 months, and a private nurse has been dispatched to her apartment to monitor her care. You have vanished, Miss Davis, but your life has been secured." Harper stopped dead in her tracks, her mouth falling open. You paid her bills?" It was hundreds of thousands of dollars. Debt that had been suffocating her family for years, erased in a car ride. Gabriel turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "You saved my life. I protect my assets, and I repay my debts. Right now, you are both. Now come inside before you catch pneumonia." The interior of the house was a masterclass in minimalist luxury. Dark wood, leather furniture, and massive fireplaces burning with real wood. Matteo immediately peeled off, pulling out a burner phone to start making calls, organizing the retaliation for the bombing. Gabriel led Harper to a massive guest suite on the second floor. The bed was larger than Harper's entire apartment bedroom. "There are clothes in the closet that should fit you. Take a hot shower. Food will be brought up shortly," Gabriel instructed, lingering in the doorway. Harper wrapped her arms around herself. Despite the warmth of the house, she felt incredibly exposed. "The tattoo," she said quietly, looking at him. "You know who it is, don't you? When I told you about the snake, Matteo reacted. You reacted." Gabriel's eyes darkened. For a moment, she thought he would ignore her, relegate her to the status of a clueless civilian. But surprisingly, he stepped into the room, closing the heavy oak door behind him. The sudden privacy amplified the tension between them. "In my world," Gabriel began, his voice dropping an octave, "trust is the most expensive currency. The men who guard me are vetted. The men who drive my cars are family." He paused, looking at the rain beating against the bulletproof glass of the bedroom window. "The coiled serpent is the mark of a specific hitman, a freelancer known as the Viper. He only works for the highest bidder." "So the Falcone family hired him?" Harper asked, trying to keep up. "Undoubtedly," Gabriel replied, turning his gaze back to her. "But the Viper wouldn't know my private Thursday schedule. Only 3 people knew I was dining at Le Sereno tonight, without my full detail." Harper's eyes widened as the horrific math clicked into place. "Your underboss, Matteo." "Matteo was with me. He's been my brother since we were children. He would take a bullet for me." "Then who?" "My financial advisor. And my cousin, Luca," Gabriel said, the name tasting like ash in his mouth. Harper gasped softly. "Your own cousin tried to have you blown up?" Gabriel took a slow step toward her. The space between them seemed to shrink, the air growing heavy. charged with a strange, magnetic friction. He was a ruthless killer, a man who commanded an empire of shadows. Yet in this moment, Harper saw a fleeting glimpse of the profound isolation that came with his power, betrayal from his own blood. Luca handles the laundering. He's been complaining about my refusal to deal in narcotics. The Falcones deal in everything, Gabriel explained, his eyes scanning Harper's face as if searching for a lie, for any sign of deception, finding only genuine empathy. It unnerved him. Luca sold me out. And you ruined his coup. So what happens now? Harper whispered, her heart pounding against her ribs. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from him. Gabriel reached out, his gloved hand hovering for a second before his thumb gently brushed a smudge of soot from her cheek. The touch was impossibly soft for a man who ordered executions before breakfast. Harper's breath hitched, a hot flush spreading across her chest at the unexpected intimacy. Now, Gabriel said softly, his dark eyes locking onto her lips before dragging back up to meet her gaze. We hunt, and you stay exactly where I can see you. He dropped his hand and turned, walking out of the room. As the heavy door clicked shut behind him, Harper collapsed onto the edge of the massive bed, burying her face in her hands. She had stopped a murder, but she had started a war. And the most terrifying part wasn't the assassins hunting her down. It was the undeniable, reckless flutter in her stomach when the Mafia boss had touched her face. Downstairs in the war room, Matteo looked up as Gabriel entered. Maps of the city and financial documents belonging to the Falcone family were spread across a massive oak table. "The girl is secure?" Matteo asked. "She is," Gabriel replied, walking over to the cabinet and pouring himself a dark scotch. "Gabriel, with respect, keeping a civilian here, it's dangerous. She's a distraction. Once we handle Luca and the Falcones, we should give her a new identity and ship her out of the country." Gabriel took a slow sip of the scotch, feeling the burn slide down his throat. He thought of Harper's fierce eyes in the rain, the way she had stood her ground against a loaded gun just to save his driver. He thought of the way she smelled like vanilla and rain, and the strange, protective rage that had flared in his chest when the sniper's sights had been trained on her. "She isn't going anywhere, Matteo," Gabriel said quietly, his tone leaving absolutely no room for debate. "She belongs to the Rossi family now." Matteo opened his mouth to argue, saw the lethal, uncompromising look in his boss's eyes, and wisely shut it. The war had begun, but Matteo realized with a sinking feeling that his boss's greatest vulnerability was no longer a bullet. It was the waitress sleeping upstairs. For 3 days, the sprawling Catskills estate felt less like a sanctuary and more like a velvet-lined purgatory. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crisp, biting cold that froze the edges of the rushing river below the cliffs. Harper spent her hours wandering the massive halls, accompanied only by the soft padding of her bare feet on imported Persian rugs and the ever-present, silent shadows of Gabriel's heavily armed guards. She was allowed a single monitored phone call to her mother's room at Mount Sinai. Hearing her mother's voice, stronger, resting comfortably under the care of a top-tier private oncologist, broke Harper down. She wept tears of profound relief, but also of terrifying uncertainty. She told her mother she was on a sudden, highly paid corporate retreat. It was a flimsy lie, but the morphine and the comfort of the new VIP suite kept her mother from questioning it too deeply. Gabriel Rossi, however, was a ghost in his own home. Harper only saw him in passing, a dark, imposing figure locked in tense conversations with Matteo in the glass-walled study, or pacing the terrace at midnight with a satellite phone pressed to his ear. The Rossi syndicate was bleeding. Luca's betrayal had sent shockwaves through the 5 boroughs, and the Falcone family was using the chaos to strike at Gabriel's legitimate shipping businesses down at the Red Hook terminals. On the evening of the 4th day, Harper finally reached her breaking point. She found Gabriel in the library, a massive room smelling of old paper and leather. He was standing by the fireplace, staring into the flames, a tumbler of amber liquid forgotten in his hand. He looked exhausted. The sharp lines of his jaw were shadowed with stubble, and the impeccably tailored suits had been replaced by a dark cashmere sweater and slacks. "How long do you plan on keeping me here?" Harper asked, her voice cutting through the silence. She stood in the doorway, wearing a simple silk blouse and jeans she had found in the guest suite's wardrobe. Gabriel turned slowly. His dark eyes swept over her, an unreadable emotion flickering in their depths before settling back into an icy calm. "Until the threat is neutralized, Miss Davis, I gave you my word. You are under my protection." "Your protection feels like a prison," Harper shot back, stepping into the room. Her fear of him had slowly morphed into a desperate, restless energy. "I'm a waitress, Mr. Rossi, not a mob wife. I don't belong in a fortress guarded by men with assault rifles." Gabriel's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but the closest thing she had seen to one. He set his glass on the mantel. "You stepped into my world the moment you ran out into the rain. You could have walked away. Why didn't you?" Harper crossed her arms, suddenly feeling very small under his intense scrutiny. "Thomas, your driver. He always asked about my mum. He tipped me even when the service was slow. I couldn't let him die." Gabriel stared at her, the silence stretching between them until it felt heavy, almost suffocating. In a world built on greed, extortion, and blood, this woman had risked being blown to pieces for a $5 tip and a kind word. It defied every brutal law of survival he had been taught since childhood. "Thomas is recovering at a private clinic," Gabriel said softly, taking a step toward her. The predatory grace of his movement made Harper's heart perform a dangerous stutter. "He owes you his life, as do I." "Then let me help you end this so I can go home," Harper demanded, tilting her chin up to meet his gaze. Gabriel stopped just a foot away from her. The scent of cedarwood and faint gunpowder clung to him. "This isn't a game, Harper. Luca isn't just trying to kill me. He's liquidating assets. Tomorrow night, there is a charity gala at the St. Regis Hotel on East 55th Street, the Children's Hearth Foundation. It's a front. Luca is meeting the Falcone underboss there to officially hand over my territory, and he's bringing the Viper to finish the job if I show up." Harper's breath hitched at the mention of the assassin. The image of the coiled serpent tattoo flashed in her mind. If you know it's a trap, why go? "Because my entire organization is watching," Gabriel's voice hardened into steel. "If I hide in the mountains while my cousin carves up my empire in Midtown Manhattan, I lose the respect of the Commission. I go to the St. Regis, I look Luca in the eye, and I execute him, publicly." Harper shivered at the casual mention of execution, but an idea, reckless and desperate, suddenly formed in her mind. "Luca knows your men. He knows Matteo. He'll spot your security the moment they walk into the ballroom." "I'm aware," Gabriel said coldly, "but he doesn't know me," Harper pointed out, her voice surprisingly steady. Gabriel's eyes narrowed dangerously. "No, absolutely not. He knows a waitress warned you, but he doesn't know my face. I was covered in rain and shadows. I could walk right into that gala. I could be your eyes. I can spot the Viper. I'm the only one who knows what his tattoo looks like up close." "I said no," Gabriel snarled, his sudden anger startling her. He grabbed her by the upper arms, his grip firm but careful not to bruise. "Do you have any idea what these men do to women they capture? They won't just kill you, Harper. They will break you to send me a message. You are staying in this house behind 3 layers of security." Harper didn't flinch. She looked up into his dark, furious eyes, realizing with a jolt that his anger wasn't born of control, it was born of fear. The ruthless head of the Rossi syndicate was terrified of losing her. "If you go in blind, you die, Gabriel," she whispered, using his first name for the first time. The sound of it on her lips caused a muscle in his jaw to feather. "If you die, they'll come here and kill me anyway. Let me do this. We save each other, that's the deal." Gabriel stared down at her, the air between them crackling with an electric tension that had nothing to do with the impending war. He slowly released her arms, his hands trailing down to gently brush her wrists. "If you do this," Gabriel's voice was a rough, gravelly whisper, "you don't leave my sight. You breathe when I breathe. You move when I move." Harper nodded, her throat tight. "Okay." "Matteo," Gabriel barked, not breaking eye contact with Harper. The heavy oak doors swung open instantly. Matteo stepped in, an unlit cigar clamped between his teeth. "Yeah, boss? Call the contact at Bergdorf Goodman. Have a selection of evening gowns sent up here by tomorrow morning. And pull the schematics for the St. Regis. We're going to a party." The Astor Ballroom at the St. Regis Hotel was a blinding display of wealth and hypocrisy. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over hundreds of New York's elite, mingling seamlessly with the city's most dangerous criminals disguised in Armani and Brioni tuxedos. Waiters weaved through the crowd carrying silver trays of champagne, completely unaware that a war was about to erupt on the marble dance floor. Harper stood near a towering column of white orchids, her hands trembling slightly against the smooth fabric of her dress. Matteo's contact had delivered a breathtaking, emerald-green silk gown that clung to her curves and cascaded to the floor, paired with a diamond necklace that cost more than her mother's entire medical debt. She looked like she belonged to a billionaire. She looked like she belonged to Gabriel. Gabriel stood beside her, a devastating figure in a midnight blue tuxedo. He radiated absolute power, a dark gravity that caused the crowds to subconsciously part around him. His hand rested firmly on the small of Harper's back, a possessive, grounding touch that sent a continuous stream of heat through her veins. "Breathe," Gabriel murmured, leaning in so his lips brushed her ear. To an onlooker it looked like a lover's whisper. "Your heart is beating like a rabbit's." "There are at least 50 men in here who want to kill you," Harper whispered back through a frozen smile, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. "Forgive me if I'm not relaxed." "Just keep scanning the room for the tattoo," Gabriel instructed, his eyes continuously sweeping the perimeter. Matteo and 4 other highly trained operatives were scattered throughout the ballroom, blending in with the guests. Then the crowd near the grand staircase parted. Luca Rossi descended the steps. He was a handsome man, sleeker and more polished than Gabriel, with slicked-back blonde hair and a confident, arrogant smirk. Beside him walked Antonio Falcone, the heavily scarred underboss of the rival family. Gabriel's grip on Harper's waist tightened to the point of pain. "Showtime." As Luca reached the floor, his eyes locked onto Gabriel. The smirk faltered for a fraction of a second before returning, stretched tight over a sudden, palpable panic. He clearly hadn't expected his cousin to walk straight into the lion's den. Luca whispered something to Falcone, and the 2 men began to move towards the VIP parlor at the back of the ballroom, away from the main crowd. "They're moving to the parlor. It's a bottleneck," Gabriel said, his voice cold and analytical. He pressed a small earpiece deeper into his ear. "Matteo, secure the east exits. Don't let Falcone's men flank us." "Boss," Matteo's voice crackled faintly from the earpiece. "We have a problem. Building security just stood down. The feds are here." Gabriel froze. "FBI? Worse. Joint Task Force. I see Director Sullivan by the coat check. They aren't raiding the party, Gabriel. They're locking the doors." Harper looked up at Gabriel, seeing a flash of genuine shock on his face. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means Luca didn't just sell me out to the Falcones," Gabriel growled, his mind racing to calculate the new variables. "He sold me out to the government. Sullivan is a corrupt bastard. He's providing a federal blockade so Luca and the Viper can kill me inside, wipe out the Falcones at the same time, and take over the entire eastern seaboard with government immunity." It was a brilliant, flawless trap, and Gabriel had walked right into it, bringing Harper with him. Suddenly the lights in the grand chandelier flickered and died. The ballroom plunged into semi-darkness, illuminated only by the emergency lights and the ambient glow from the street windows. Panic erupted. Women screamed, and the high society guests began a frantic stampede toward the main doors, only to find them chained shut by Sullivan's rogue agents. "Get down!" Gabriel roared, pulling Harper with him to the marble floor just as the unmistakable, deafening crack, crack, crack of suppressed automatic gunfire tore through the room. The glass of the orchid vases shattered, raining down on them. Gabriel shielded Harper with his body, drawing a heavy, suppressed Heckler and Coke USP tactical pistol from his shoulder holster. Through the chaos of screaming guests and stampeding feet, Harper saw him. Moving with terrifying, calm precision through the panicked crowd was a man in a waiter's uniform. He held a suppressed MP5 submachine gun. As he raised his arm to aim at Matteo across the room, the cuff of his white shirt slipped back. In the dim red glow of the emergency exit sign, the green and black scales of a coiled serpent were visible on his left wrist. "Gabriel! The waiter by the ice sculpture! 3 o'clock!" Harper screamed over the noise, pointing frantically. Gabriel pivoted instantly. He didn't hesitate. He fired twice. The heavy .45 caliber rounds struck the Viper in the chest, throwing the assassin backward onto a table of champagne glasses, sending crystal shattering across the floor. "Move!" Gabriel hauled Harper to her feet, dragging her toward the heavy mahogany doors of the kitchen. Gunfire erupted from the VIP parlor. Luca's men were pushing out, firing indiscriminately into the crowd to hit Gabriel. Matteo and Gabriel's men returned fire, turning the luxurious Astor ballroom into a war zone of shredded silk, shattered glass, and blood. Gabriel kicked open the kitchen doors, pulling Harper into the gleaming stainless steel labyrinth. The kitchen staff had already fled. It was eerily quiet compared to the slaughter in the ballroom. "We go out through the loading dock. My car is armored and waiting in the alley," Gabriel panted, his eyes scanning the industrial stoves and walk-in freezers. But as they rounded the corner toward the back exit, a figure stepped out from the shadows of the dry storage room, blocking their path. It was Luca. He held a silver 1911 pistol, aimed directly at Harper's chest. "Hello, cousin," Luca said, his chest heaving, his slicked-back hair disheveled. He looked terrified, yet utterly desperate. "I knew you couldn't resist a grand entrance. But bringing a date, that's sloppy, Gabriel." Gabriel stepped in front of Harper, a human shield. He raised his own weapon, pointing it dead between Luca's eyes. "Put the gun down, Luca. You're bleeding out of your organization. The Viper is dead. Sullivan will abandon you the second the real FBI shows up to investigate a mass shooting at the St. Regis. Sullivan is getting paid $10 million to look the other way while I clean up your mess. Luca shouted, his hand trembling slightly. "You made us weak, Gabriel. You refused to adapt. You wouldn't run the drugs. You wouldn't pay off the right politicians. You act like a king, but you run this family like a charity." "I run it with honor," Gabriel said coldly. "Something you clearly lack." "Honor doesn't pay the bills," Luca spat. He shifted his aim slightly, peering around Gabriel's broad shoulder to look at Harper. "And who is this?" "Ah, the little waitress who ruined the car bomb. I should have known you'd keep her like a pet." Luca's finger tightened on the trigger. "Drop the gun, Gabriel, or I blow her heart out through her spine." Harper felt the blood drain from her face. She pressed her back against the cold tile of the kitchen wall. She expected Gabriel to fire. He was faster. He was a trained killer. He could put a bullet in Luca's brain before his cousin could blink. But Gabriel Rossi did something that shocked the criminal underworld for years to come. Gabriel looked at Harper. For a split second, the cold, impenetrable Mafia boss vanished. In his eyes, Harper saw a profound, terrifying vulnerability. He loved her. In the span of 4 days, the ruthless king of New York had found the one thing he was unwilling to risk. Slowly, deliberately, Gabriel lowered his weapon and dropped it onto the tile floor. It landed with a heavy clatter. Luca's eyes widened in disbelief, followed by a cruel, triumphant bark of laughter. The great Gabriel Rossi, brought to his knees by a civilian. Luca raised his gun, aiming it squarely at Gabriel's chest. Goodbye, cousin. The silence in the St. Regis kitchen was heavier than the humid, grease-laden air. Time seemed to fracture, stretching the seconds into agonizing hours as Luca Rossi's finger tightened on the trigger. Harper pressed her spine against the white subway tiles, her mind screaming. Gabriel had dropped his weapon. The undisputed king of the New York underworld had surrendered his life for a girl he had known for less than a week. It was an act of profound, terrifying vulnerability that defied every law of the syndicate. Goodbye, cousin, Luca sneered, the silver barrel of the 1911 steadying on Gabriel's heart. But Luca had made a fatal miscalculation. He had focused entirely on the predator he knew, completely dismissing the civilian he deemed a pet. Harper was a waitress. She had spent the last 4 years navigating the treacherous, high-pressure environments of Michelin-starred kitchens. She knew the layout of a commercial line better than she knew her own apartment. Less than 2 feet to her right, mounted on a stainless steel pillar, was a heavy-duty Ansel fire extinguisher, a dense red cylinder packed with pressurized dry chemicals. Harper didn't think. Instinct, fueled by a primal surge of adrenaline, took over. As Luca's finger began the final pull of the trigger, Harper lunged. She didn't dive for cover. She threw her entire body weight toward the pillar, her hands ripping the extinguisher from its bracket. In one fluid, desperate motion, she swung the heavy metal cylinder in a wide, vicious arc. She didn't aim for the gun. She aimed for the skull. The heavy steel base of the extinguisher connected with the side of Luca's head with a sickening crack. The force of the blow sent Luca staggering sideways. The gun fired, the deafening report echoing off the metal surfaces, but the bullet went wide, sparking against a commercial Hobart mixer and tearing into the ceiling. Before Luca could recover, Gabriel moved. He was a blur of calculated violence, a coiled spring suddenly released. He closed the distance in a fraction of a second, his left hand violently redirecting Luca's gun arm upward, while his right fist buried itself into his cousin's ribcage with bone-shattering force. Luca collapsed, dropping the weapon as the breath was violently forced from his lungs. Gabriel didn't hesitate. He brought his knee up, connecting with Luca's jaw, knocking the traitor completely unconscious on the pristine white tiles. Gabriel stood over his cousin's limp body, his chest heaving, his dark eyes ablaze with lethal intensity. He scooped up his discarded H&K pistol, then turned to Harper. She was slumped against the prep counter, the heavy fire extinguisher slipping from her trembling fingers to clatter onto the floor. She was gasping for air, her emerald green gown torn at the hem, her flawless makeup smudged with soot and sweat. Gabriel crossed the space between them in 2 strides. He didn't speak. He reached out, pulling her flush against his chest, burying his face in her hair. His grip was tight, desperate, anchoring them both to the reality that they were still breathing. Harper wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the furious, rapid beating of his heart against her cheek. For a fleeting moment amidst the chaos, there was only the smell of his cedarwood cologne and the overwhelming safety of his embrace. "Boss!" The heavy kitchen doors kicked open. Matteo burst in, flanked by 2 bruised but alive operatives. Matteo's tuxedo was ruined, his face smeared with blood from a shallow cut on his cheek, but his submachine gun was raised and ready. Matteo took one look at Luca, unconscious on the floor, and let out a harsh breath. "Sullivan's men are breaching the lobby. They're using tear gas. The local NYPD units are confused, but the feds are locking down the perimeter. If we don't vanish in 60 seconds, we're spending the rest of our lives in a black site." Gabriel stepped back from Harper, his expression instantly hardening, back into the cold, strategic mask of the Rossi syndicate boss. He reached down, grabbing Luca by the collar of his expensive suit, dragging his unconscious cousin effortlessly. "We take the freight elevator down to the sub-basement laundry facilities," Gabriel ordered, his voice slicing through the lingering ringing in their ears. There's a maintenance tunnel that connects to the subway ventilation shafts on 54th Street. Is the extraction vehicle in position? Armored Suburban, waiting at the grate, Matteo confirmed, taking point as they rushed towards the back of the kitchen. The descent was a nightmare of flashing red emergency lights and echoing sirens. They moved swiftly through the damp, concrete bowels of the hotel, dragging the unconscious traitor with them. When they finally burst through the heavy steel maintenance doors onto the rain-slicked pavement of 54th Street, the cold night air felt like a physical shock. The black Suburban idled menacingly in the shadows. They piled in, Gabriel shoving Luca onto the floorboards before pulling Harper into the seat beside him. The tires shrieked as the massive vehicle tore away from the curb, disappearing into the chaotic labyrinth of Manhattan traffic, just as a fleet of black FBI tactical vans swarmed the front of the St. Regis. Inside the SUV, the adrenaline crash hit Harper like a physical blow. She began to shake violently, her teeth chattering despite the heated interior. Gabriel watched her, his expression softening in the dim light of the passing street lamps. He reached across the console, his large, warm hand enveloping hers, his thumb tracing soothing circles over her knuckles. He didn't say a word, but the profound gratitude and possessive claim in his dark eyes spoke volumes. He had laid down his life for her, and she had fought like a cornered lioness to save his. The contract of debt between them had been burned to ash. What remained was something infinitely more dangerous. They didn't return to the Catskills. The mountain estate was compromised. Instead, Matteo drove them to a place completely off the books, an ultra-exclusive private penthouse occupying the top floor of 432 Park Avenue. Registered under a shell corporation belonging to Gabriel's legitimate venture capital firm, it was a fortress in the sky, completely impenetrable to both the Falcone family and Director Sullivan's corrupt task force. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in psychological warfare. Gabriel did not kill Luca. Death would have been too easy. Instead, Gabriel locked his cousin in the soundproof panic room of the penthouse and broke him. It didn't take physical torture. Gabriel simply laid out the evidence Matteo had recovered from Luca's private servers. Luca had been sloppy. He had kept meticulous digital ledgers of his bribes to Director Sullivan, hoping to use them as blackmail if the feds ever turned on him. Gabriel used those ledgers. He sent a heavily encrypted, anonymous file to the Internal Affairs Division of the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office, and several major news outlets. By dawn on the third day, the city was in an uproar. Director Sullivan was arrested in a highly publicized dawn raid at his Westchester home. With their government protection shattered, the Falcone family was decimated by federal indictments within hours. The war was over without Gabriel having to fire another shot. He had weaponized the very system that had tried to destroy him. But as the dust settled over the criminal underworld, the true shock was waiting for Harper. She was sitting on the massive white leather sofa in the penthouse, staring blankly at the breathtaking view of Central Park, when Gabriel walked in. He wore a crisp, white button-down, the sleeves rolled up to reveal his muscular forearms. He carried a manila folder, his expression tight, a dark storm brewing in his eyes. "The Falcones are finished," Gabriel said quietly, sitting beside her on the sofa. "Luca has been handed over to the commission. He will be dealt with according to the old laws. You are safe, Harper. You can go home." Harper looked at him, a sharp ache radiating in her chest. The words "you can go home" felt like a death sentence. The gilded cage had vanished, but the thought of leaving the phantom who had protected her was unbearable. "Is that what you want?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Gabriel didn't answer immediately. He looked down at the manila folder in his hands. "There is something you need to know. Something I discovered while tearing apart Luca's financial networks." He opened the folder and handed her a stack of documents. They bore the logo of Mount Sinai Hospital. Harper frowned, scanning the top page. It was a billing statement for her mother's chemotherapy. "I don't understand. You paid this." "Look closer at the routing numbers, Harper," Gabriel instructed, his voice thick with repressed fury. "Your mother's treatment cost roughly $40,000 a year. Yet, for the past 3 years, she has been billed over $500,000 annually, a debt that was mathematically impossible for a waitress to pay off." Harper's breath hitched. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Luca wasn't just laundering money through my legitimate shipping fronts," Gabriel revealed, the twist hitting Harper like a physical strike. "He was using high-end private hospitals. He would find patients from low-income backgrounds, fabricate exorbitant medical debts under their names, and funnel dirty cartel money through the hospital's collections agencies to pay the debts, effectively washing the cash clean. Your mother wasn't just unlucky, Harper. She was chosen." The room spun. The crippling debt, the double shifts at Le Sereno, the sleepless nights crying over bills. It wasn't a flaw in the healthcare system. It was a deliberate, calculated scheme by the Mafia. "And me?" Harper whispered, tears welling in her eyes as the horrific puzzle snapped together. "Why was the Viper under the car that night? Why didn't he wait for you to leave the restaurant?" Gabriel's jaw clenched. "Because Luca needed a scapegoat. The bomb was rigged to go off while you were taking out the trash in the alley. Luca had already planted fabricated bank records, making it look like you accepted a massive bribe from the Falcones to place the explosive. He chose you because you were the desperate waitress with $500,000 in medical debt. A perfect, believable motive. When you warned me instead, you ruined his perfect frame job. That's why he wanted you dead so badly in the kitchen." Harper dropped the papers, her hands covering her mouth as a sob tore from her throat. Her entire life of suffering had been a pawn move in a mobster's chess game. Gabriel reached out, pulling her into his arms. He held her tightly as she cried, his chin resting on the top of her head. "I didn't know, Harper. I swear to you, I didn't know until I looked at his ledgers. If I had known, I would have killed him years ago." Harper pressed her face into his chest, clutching the fabric of his shirt. "You gave up everything to save me in that kitchen," she cried. "Why?" Gabriel pulled back slightly, framing her tear-stained face with his hands. His dark eyes, usually so guarded and cold, were stripped bare, revealing a soul that had been irrevocably altered by her presence. "Because before you ran into that rain, I was just surviving." "I was a king of ghosts," Gabriel confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "You saved a driver for a $5 tip. You fought an armed assassin with a fire extinguisher. You have more honor and courage in your little finger than the entire syndicate. You asked if I wanted you to go home. The truth is, Harper, my home is wherever you are." He didn't wait for her response. Gabriel leaned down, his lips crashing down on hers with a desperate, consuming hunger. Harper kissed him back, pouring every ounce of her fear, her relief, and her undeniable love into the embrace. It was a kiss that sealed a new empire, built not on blood and extortion, but on absolute, unyielding loyalty. In the months that followed, Gabriel Rossi made good on his word. He systematically dismantled the illegal arms of his family, transitioning his massive wealth entirely into legitimate venture capitalism and philanthropy. He bought the wing of Mount Sinai Hospital, ensuring no family would ever be exploited by phantom debts again. And Harper? She never went back to waitressing. She stood by Gabriel's side, the undisputed queen of a reformed empire, proving that sometimes the greatest act of rebellion in a world of monsters is simply choosing to love one. What a breathtaking ride, from a terrifying encounter in a dark alley to a high-stakes shootout in one of New York's most exclusive ballrooms. Harper and Gabriel's story proves that true loyalty can rewrite the rules of any empire. The twist of Luca manipulating Harper's mother's medical debt shows just how deeply intertwined their fates were from the very beginning. Did you see that massive betrayal coming? Or did the St. Regis standoff leave you on the edge of your seat? If you loved this intense Mafia romance, the heart-stopping action, and Gabriel's ultimate sacrifice, you need to be part of our community. Hit that like button to support the channel. Share this video with anyone who loves a good enemies to lovers crime drama. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss out on our next thrilling real-life story.